And right now, I'd like to invite Professor Santwan Chattopadhyay, sir, of Jadavpur University. Santwan, sir, may I request you to, okay. Good evening, sir. You have been waiting.
নমস্কার।
একদম সরি, আমি একটু ওভারশুট করে গেছি টাইম, সরি।
না ওভারশুট কি, মানে it is always a pleasure to listen to you.
Good evening, sir. Let me introduce Professor Santwan Chattopadhyay, sir. Sir has been associated with Jadavpur University's Media Studies Department for a long time, and he has been in this academic section for the past 2 decades. Apart from that, sir's main thrust area is political communication. Those who are already get themselves befriended with sir in social media network, especially Facebook, they are very well aware about sir's satirical posts. Mostly every time any kind of political incidents happen, sir basically comes out with his own views in a very satirical way and sometimes in a sarcastical way. Sir, this evening is yours. I won't waste much time. So over to you, sir. And we are eagerly waiting to listen to you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Greetings to my friends present in this platform. Well, you are aware that I have been assigned with the topic that the responsibility of media in development journalism. Am I properly audible? Okay, done.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So before going to the core area, I just want to recapitulate how development communication actually became normative concept in the theory space or theoryscape of mass communication studies. It is known to all that this normative concept was introduced in the theoryscape of media studies in the late 1950s. Actually, normative theory, the proposition was that media cannot operate in a vacuum. Rather, it has to comply with the existing norm of the governance. So in late 1950s, Schreiber, Schramm, Peterson, these theoreticians, they actually identified 4 definite norms. 1, authoritarian norms, then libertarian norm, then social responsibility as a norm, and Soviet norm or socialist norm. In early 1980s, Dennis Maxwell added 2 more norms with the theoryscape of media studies. First of those was development communication. Now, in which backdrop this development communication was introduced as a norm in the mass communication or media studies. We must recapitulate the debate was going on during that time regarding the imbalance of information order, rather imbalance in information dissemination in the international information sphere. In fact, UNESCO has set up to introspect upon this imbalance McBride Commission in 1978. So the debate of imbalance in dissemination of information and introduction of development communication as a norm in the theoryscape of journalism and mass communication almost happened simultaneously. That is a very important point to remember. Now, in this backdrop, if we look at, we will find 3 distinctive approaches the theoreticians actually focused on as the role of communication in development. the first set of opinion was like that. Communication is an infrastructure in the process of development. The second set of idea, rather the second paradigm, was communication is an integral part of development. This basically goes close with the social scientists and the researchers who actually conducted research. Their objective outlook was that there should not be any prejudice. Rather, communication is a residual factor in the process of social change. It has to be studied objectively. And in this backdrop, rather the questions of my fellow communication colleagues also provoking me to put up one thing. We must keep in mind the difference between development and developmentalism. Now, development actually deals with fundamental change or radical change. That is that aims at changing the society. But what is developmentalism? Developmentalism basically is measuring the development on the basis of production of consumer goods. On the basis of production of consumer goods, I want to focus that there is a contradiction between development and developmentalism. So developmentalism basically is that goes with the questions of our fellow colleagues were asking Rinalda, that developmentalism basically is showcasing any incident as a development, focusing that rather in a form of propaganda, a particular event as development, instead of changing the status quo. That is developmentalism. So developmentalism basically is the gap between the modernizing elites and the traditional mass. Dr. Orgo perhaps was asking about the Danamaji case. So I think I'll not be harsh enough if I say the gap between development and developmentalism is basically the gap between the shining India and Bharatvarsha. That is the that difference between development and developmentalism. And developmentalism is often used as an illusion of development that distracts the basic fundamental concept of development. And in this backdrop, we may look upon the responsibilities which actually I have been assigned with, the responsibilities of the media in development journalism. It is perhaps known to all that development, the definition of development communication, the most acceptable definition, there are many definitions, but perhaps the most accepted definition was coined by Nora Quebral. Nora Quebral was the pioneer in actually shaping, taking on this development communication, the discipline. Nora Quebral passed away 2 years back. Nora Quebral, what did she actually say? Development communication basically is the art and science of human communication, which aims at transformation, speedy transformation of a country and the mass of its people for larger fulfillment of human potential. Now, initially there was debate whether these two apparently different words, arts and science, can be used simultaneously side by side. Now, what was the outcome of that debate? Now, this arts and science, two apparently different terms, I just single quote the word apparent, apparently opposite terms, actually collaborated with each other for defining development communication. What Nora Quebel actually defined as the responsibility of media in development communication. That is nothing but formulation of message. Formulation of message has to be done targeting the particular audience. Now, finding out audience is a meticulous scientific job. So these two things are basically overlapping with each other. These two things actually coincided with each other for better result, better outcome. So that is how Nora Quebel defined development communication. And if Everett Rogers focused on the favorable climate. He focused on media's responsibility of creating favorable climate for development. He actually advocated for the role of media in facilitating development. Now, what he actually said, there are two types of favorable climate. One is physical, another is psychological. Media has to play definite role in both the things. Once again, these two things, physical climate and psychological climate, actually are embedded with each other. Physical climate, media has to focus new things. Once again, our fellow colleagues were also questioning Rinalda. Is there any deficiency in the mainstream media in focusing the real stories? So media's role is to focus, is to hammer onto the real stories, real within single quote, real stories, and by focusing that, by reiterating that, psychological atmosphere can be favorable, psychological atmosphere can be created where people can involve themselves in the process of development. Now, there are twofold role of development journalism. One is transforming role. The basic purpose of development is nothing but to transform. So, the fundamental role of development journalism is nothing but to transform. It is the transforming role. And of course, the second one is the socializing role. Number one, this transformation has to be socialized. It has to be communicated to the greater mass, number one. And number two, society is very, very important, because I mentioned in the start of my lecture that any media, they have to operate under a particular norm. So these two roles are very important: transforming role and socializing role. And now, if we look at the philosophy of development journalism, a philosophy of development journalism is basically three-dimensional thing. It is combination of three P's. It is basically PQ. Number one, as I just said while discussing the transforming role, the philosophy of development journalism is that it is definitely purposive. The introduction of development journalism or development communication happened with a definite purpose to address the development gap between the haves and the have-nots. So it started its journey with a definite purpose. So it is purposive in nature. The other two P's are positive and pragmatic. Now, being positive and pragmatic in presenting developmental story or stories on development, that basically bears a dialectical stage. Why I say so? Why I'm saying so? Number one, in development communication or development journalism, we actually focus lack of development. The underdevelopments are focused that it should not have happened like this. But why it has to be presented in a positive frame? Because as Nora Quebron mentioned, it's the art and science of human communication. Obviously, the first philosophy of development journalism, as I said, it actually started with a definite purpose that it with a transforming role. If they present the matter in a negative connotation, then what will happen? Development audience will feel fatalistic. That this up to this has been assigned for them by some superpower, and the status quo can never be changed. So the purpose of development will be absolutely jeopardized. So it is a challenge, as Brinalda was saying, it is not fashion journalism. It's a very innovative kind of thing, very challenging in its own form. So the positive stories have to be communicated to actually transfer hope to the people, to the development audience. And it has to be pragmatic for the same cause. If we promise something lofty, then what will happen if we cannot achieve that goal? Once again, the development audience will feel that that much was assigned to them by some superpower and it cannot be changed. So the transforming role can never be achieved. So this is the dialectical state of the development communication, of presenting development stories in development journalism, that being positive and being pragmatic is very important in development journalism. Talking about this dialectical note actually reminded me about focusing on the dichotomies. What are the contradictions present in the society? That actually is the canvas of development journalism. What are the contradictions which actually can be focused? We cannot focus on the rather, there are many media with their different editorial views. So what are the contradictions? There are more or less 10 contradictions identified in development journalism. First of all, of course, is growth versus distribution. Lack of development actually starts from distributive injustice. So this is the contradiction or dichotomy between the growth and distribution is very important for development journalism. Agricultural development versus industrial development is a very important field of study. In fact, in West Bengal, the change of regime took place on the basis of this debate. Third is the urban development versus rural development. What can be the direction of development? Capital-intensive development or labor-intensive development? Centralized development or decentralized development? Perhaps we know about the two paradigms, dominant paradigms and alternative paradigms. Dominant paradigms actually talked about centralized development. Modern versus traditional concept. Socioeconomic versus physical planning. global versus local concept. So these are the contradiction or dichotomies which can produce several developmental stories, and development journalism can focus on these contradictions. And role of media. If we focus on the role of media in development journalism, the first and foremost task of media is to circulate knowledge about new things, what is happening. We all know the fourfold task of communication: to inform, to educate, to entertain, and to persuade. Now, informing the stories of development, or rather the initiation of development, is the primary task of the media in development communication. Then, of course, providing a forum where both ways flow of information can take place. Media should act as a forum. Media should provide a forum where discussion about developmental issues, developmental policies can take place. Number 3, focus on new skills or changes in the society. And number 4 is creating and maintaining a basis of consensus. It is very important, because if consensus is not there, then sensational journalism will come up, and lack of consensus will only lead to lack of development, because there will be no agreement of further step. So media's responsibility is to create and maintain a basis of consensus, and this media's role of creating a forum, presenting a forum, can play a very important role in that. We are all aware of the contribution of Daniel Lerner in the field of the direction in which development communication may be framed. A question was on empathy. Mrinalda spoke about empathy. Daniel Lerner actually focused on empathy, and he told the desired amount of development could not happen due to lack of empathy. We have to be empathetic rather than being sympathetic. So empathy is a very important thing, and Daniel Lerner actually, in the model he presented, he actually showed how literacy, increase in literacy after urbanization is actually resulting into economic and political participation. Now, participation is the key word of development, and development communication should enthuse participation. And of course, with that, it resulted into mass media exposure. People, after rise in literacy and urbanization, took part in the economic and political debate and development, and it resulted into mass media exposure. And so the scope of development journalism, as well as the responsibility of the journalism, development journalism, increased. Everett Rogers focused on diffusion. Now, the theory is diffusion of innovation is known to all of us, but what was the implication of this theory? This diffusion of innovation actually focused how an information can be disseminated in a multi-layered society, how to be targeted for a heterogeneous mass where heterogeneity has to be taken care of. So in that case, diffusion is actually taking care of the diversity among the development audience. And of course, then comes Wilbur Schramm. Wilbur Schramm actually, he was actually spearheading UNESCO project known as Mass Media and National Development in 1960s. And he emphasized on the magic multiplication role of mass media. And in that case, Schramm actually focused on two-way communication. Not only two-way communication, Schramm focused on the available resources in a community. Schramm focused on two-way communication. Schramm told that information must flow not only to them, but also from them. It's a contemplated line. Not only to them, but also from them. So this is focusing on the element of participation of the development. And also, Schramm focused on as the development agenda rise, so mass media, their role, canvas of mass media, that is also increasing, and to multiply messages can be development agenda and huge focused on, as I have already mentioned, the use of available. I said in the very outset that the concept of international, especially the imbalanced debate in international communication, development communication as a are actually overlapping platform as. So he also focused that non-use dependency on the adopted by the developed countries is a big obstacle and underdeveloped countries. So he focused on the use of indigenous resources. He focused on the use of traditional forms of communication. Traditional forms of communication, we all know, actually are local resources. So development agenda could also be multiplied by using these traditional forms of communication. So Schramm, by stating this, actually stated not only the use of mass media, but along with the use of other communication channels, can only put forward the development, the issues of development in development journalism. And UNESCO also focused on another thing, that is identifying communication needs and resources. Actually, identification of communication needs and resources is also a local concept that cannot actually, রবীন্দ্রনাথ যেমন বলেছিলেন আর কি, যে দেশি তলোয়ারে আমরা বিলিতি খাপে ভরার চেষ্টা করছি। We are trying to adopting only the measures available in the developed countries. So that is the thing. UNESCO while identifying the importance of communication needs and resources, has focused on the importance of availability of indigenous resources, availability of local culture. Importance was given on the local heritage and use of all these forms, and popularization of all these forms are also very important component of development journalism, because imbalance of information dissemination in information sphere is not confined only within the content exchange. In fact, the vehicles of the content which carries content, they also actually creates fetish among the development audience. So it is also very, very important to actually point out this development needs and resources at the community level, at the local level, at the country level, and of course in the international level. So these 4 layers of identifying development needs and resources have been focused in UNESCO's guideline. And as I started in the outset, I had mentioned about McBride Commission, the very popular book, Many Voices, One World. Besides many recommendations, in Many Voices, One World, there is one recommendation that communication has to be treated as human rights. If communication has to be treated as a human right, then development journalism has to play a pioneering role for that. In fact, it is collaboration of integrated approach as well as institutional approach. UNESCO and other organizations, they are laying so many codes or recommendation as an institution, and different communities, different countries with same problem, communities with same problem, they can integrate their issues. And so this integrated approach and institutional approach, if these 2 things can work hand in hand, then development journalism will be enriched, and of course the goal of development can be achieved. And I want to wrap up my submission with basically one experience, first-hand experience. Well, I teach in the Department of Adult Continuing Education and Extension of Jadavpur University. This is basically the combination of formal education and non-formal education. Once again, if you look at the recommendations of McBride Commission has also recommended that collaboration or coexistence of formal education and non-formal education is important in the communication policy and education policy of the developing countries. Now, what non-formal education can do? Non-formal education can include the marginalized into the mainstream education. So, once again, these 2 things should work hand in hand. Actually, I was referring one action research. Basically, it was a World Bank project. I was associated with that. I'm privileged to be associated with that. And that was the project of adopting 3 nearby villages by the department and formulate a model with long-term observation by providing them number one, skill training. First of all, of course, literacy. There are two phases. One is literacy phase, and then it was post-literacy phase. So in literacy phase, they were empowered with literacy. And after they become literate, now their need got changed. Now, the literacy actually imparted new need for them. They actually wanted to be skilled enough to earn themselves and elevate their standard of living. So the post-literacy phase was to impart skill education to them. And it was clearly observed that by using that, in fact, it was a collaborative work. Our department actually framed the thing. Research was conceived by the department, funded by World Bank, but as I mentioned, diffusion of innovation. In diffusion of innovation, there basically are four components. Of course, the new knowledge innovation, there is communication channel, time for adoption, and the social system. So considering, I tried to incorporate Everett Rogers' model, diffusion of innovation, in context of this project. And I could find out that as we collaborated with 3 local Gram Panchayats, so that the innovation, if university is the center of innovation, then it is actually using the social system by disseminating that information to reach out the development audience by using intermediate statutory body called Gram Panchayat, which is closest to the inhabitants. And of course, as I mentioned, in diffusion of innovation, Rogers actually focused on different time taking for adoption. So he focused on the multi-layered society. So we focused on how different segments of learners are actually adopting with the new skills. Who are late learners, advanced course has to be offered for them. Who are laggard, repetitive course has to be offered for them. So I tried to incorporate this model of development communication with that project, and I found there is a symmetry. There is a symmetry. In fact, what I said, positive stories. We have to find out positive stories in development journalism so that it can enthuse the development audience. It can give them hope that this situation can be changed, the order can be rotated, the order can be changed. It is the elementary task of development journalism, and of course the fundamental goal of development. This actually is the backdrop, or I can collect how media should play a responsible role in development journalism. I think I should go for question now, if there is any. Shomok.
So I think he's facing some technical issues. So
Okay.
I would continue
Yeah,
with it.
You
I
just take
can
over.
absolutely. If I can request questions for this wonderful session of discussion. Anybody with any questions to Professor Dr. Santwan Chattopadhyay? The platform is open. So till questions come in, I have a small question. I was hearing
Yeah.
this project of yours that you people have undertaken. So what was the major challenge that you faced, specifically when you spoke about reaching out to the gram panchayats and all? What was the major challenge in this outreach program? And
The first challenge was the psychological barrier. These people from the urban area are intruding in our area. That was the foremost challenge. First of all, we have to break the shackle that we are not coming from a different planet. For that, different things have to be done. I remember one thing. One lady used to prepare pickle, and our colleague, she went to her and asked to taste pickle. You know, that act as a magic. Almost suddenly, the shackle broken. First of all, the difference between empathy and sympathy has to be differentiated. If we actually try to actually disseminate the information in a hierarchical order, then it would have been sympathy. If you try to be close to them, talk to them, then only that shackle will break down and empathy will appear.
Absolutely, sir. This was again something that was in discussion while Mrinal Chatterjee sir's session was also talking about empathizing with the concern of the grassroots people. And I agree with you completely. Any questions from anyone? I think Dr. Orgho Mukhopadhyay has raised his hand. Dr. Orgho Mukhopadhyay, if we can request you to unmute yourself and keep.
Yes, sir, just I want to know that how the developmental journalism, because in rural sector in our country, it is remotest of the corner in those areas, how their problem can be come in the pipeline or the front page line like that. So in developmental journalism, specifically in our structure, traditionally the district correspondent, they are doing their story in district area, but we the people who are in the city or the main bureau, we do not go there. So is there any gap or the lacking due to that, so that the developmental news stories are not getting in proper treatment?
There is a huge gap. There is a huge gap. And one thing Rinaldo was referring, that how the situation is changing. That actually goes with the definition of development. Development is nothing but a continuous process. It has to continue. That is why we debate on development from the ancient time to till now, and we will do it in the future also. So it's a continuous process, number one. Number two, it cannot be done overnight. একটা ডেভেলপমেন্টের খবর কালকেই একটা মেইনস্ট্রিম কাগজের প্রথম পাতায় ছবি দিয়ে করা যাবে না। It's a mental block, number one. Number two, of course, mainstream journalism has to sell itself. So আমরা philosophical তো অনেক কথা বলতে পারি, but we have to survive. The mainstream media has to survive on the revenue earning. So unless it becomes the popular social agenda, mainstream media will not be compelled to bring up the story and carry it with proper weightage. So once again, I refer Wilbur Schramm. We have to use alternative media. We have so many alternative media nowadays. we can popularize. P. Sainath is doing this kind of work for a long time in India. The mainstream media has given him award from them, award for this work to him, but has never carried this particular story in the front page. So once again, there is another dichotomy. So I think use of alternative media, use of traditional forms of communication can change the game, but I repeat, that will not happen overnight.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for answering his query. On this note, sir, we would take this opportunity to thank you.
Madam, should I ask one question? Just
Please. Sorry, I thought.
Sir, one thing just I want to know to make it clear to me. Actually, when the Sachar committee report was being placed in the urban area and especially in the city Muslims and others in the slums area who are living, so it was strongly criticized by the ruling party. But after that there is also very less number development has been done. Because if you go to the Park Circus area or others in Mahestala and all these areas, so Sachar committee report has not been properly been followed. So as a developmental journalist or the journalists who are doing the reporting on it, what should be the stand of them and how they could be non-biased and how they could be in a proper way to do that reporting? If you just please, sir.
Very interesting question for me. Very interesting question. Because if the developmental issue is politicalized, then the fabric of development is lost, I think. If the issue is politicalized and used politically, then the entire debate would go in a different way. And every connotation will follow the political sum up. That, I think, is a hindrance to covering development journalism. Of course, there will be criticism of the government, but if it is turned into a political issue, then the substance of addressing the issue, cutting across political color, what development agenda should do, that becomes a bit tertiary in nature, not only secondary, but I think tertiary. So it is once again the lack of mainstream media to politicalize the issue. They never follow up what has happened. It is politicalization and sensationalization. Both are actually a counterplay to the philosophy of development journalism.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And on this note, sir, we would like to take the opportunity to thank you. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for sharing such valuable insights. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to ask you so much of questions and to deliberate and discuss issues so very relevant to this field of development journalism. Specifically, the insights that you've shared with your own practical experience of trying to to implement certain developmental projects. It is really something which enriches our entire deliberation today. Thank you, sir, and thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you to all the participants. On this note, we come to the end for today's session. Good night, sir. Thank you.
Yes, good night.